O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Good afternoon, members. Minister's statement. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Government of the Northwest Territories is committed to a competent public service that is representative of the people it serves. As members would be aware, the N.W.T has a variety of tools to achieve this goal, including the affirmative action policy that offers priority hiring to candidates belonging to eligible designated groups that are underrepresented within the public service. Recently, the Human Resource Branch of the Department of Finance added 2 new diversity and inclusion initiatives aimed at further shrinking the gap of underrepresented groups and make it easier for Indigenous Northerners to access training and gain valuable on-the-job experience with the N.W.T. The Indigenous Career Gateway Program is intended for the Northwest Territories residents who are designated Indigenous Aboriginal persons under the N.W.T Affirmative Action Policy and interested in careers with the territorial government. The Department of Finance will work closely with departments to create entry-level positions and develop individualized training plans for applicants who may not meet all the qualifications for typical positions posted. These individuals will be provided with a training plan that will help them acquire the skills and qualifications to gain valuable work experience that is often required for long-term employment with the N.W.T. This initiative, Mr. Speaker, supports the N.W.T's priority to develop and maintain a diverse workforce that is representative of all the people it serves. In order to make this program as accessible as possible, interested applicants will be able to apply directly through the N.W.T Careers website. In addition, the N.W.T has launched the Indigenous Management Development and Training Program. This program will help provide current Indigenous Aboriginal employees with necessary skills, training, and work experience for career advancement. The Department of Finance will provide financial support to departments beyond existing training and education programs to further the career objectives of Indigenous employees. Interested employees will be encouraged to work with their managers to identify education and training opportunities that could be supported through this new initiative. This program will also be an important tool as we address the challenges of our aging workforce and the need for additional succession planning. Mr. Speaker, our people are the Territory's greatest resource. Investing in the skills and qualification of Northerners provides employment for our people and benefits all residents of the N.W.T. We all share the goal of our public service being representative of the population we serve. The reality is that work within the public service is getting more and more technical. Growth areas like healthcare-related occupations and scientific and technology-based jobs all require support to ensure residents have the skills and abilities to take advantage of these opportunities. To achieve our overall goal, we need more than hiring preferences. We need to develop the skills and experience of our population and to focus on the development of our existing workforce to help achieve their career goals. These 2 initiatives help build on our existing programs and services, including developmental transfer assignments, our Leadership Develop program, and other training and education support, the internship program, the summer student program, and the regional recruitment program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister statement. Minister Ike Godani, the Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, protecting our children from abuse and neglect and providing services aimed at keeping families healthy, safe, and intact are fundamental priorities of this government. This is a priority for me personally as well. Since joining the Legislative Assembly in 2007, both as a regular member and as a minister, I've worked to ensure that our children and family services system is built around the philosophy that the best supports for children are strong and resilient families. Our government has actively supported this philosophy through investments in early childhood development, strengthened our response to mental health and addictions, support for on-the-land programming, addressing poverty, and engaging with communities in the development of community wellness plans. With the collaboration of our partners, we've also taken proactive steps to shape a better future for children, families, and communities served by the Child and Family Services system. Mr. Speaker, the Director of Child and Family Services, as part of the responsibility under the Child and Family Services Act, produces an annual report that details the activities undertaken over the year in this important program area. The report also outlines a number of key trends in the Child and Family Services system over a 10-year period. This offers a transparent process to track the progress and to help identify areas in need of focused attention. Mr. Speaker, later today I will table the 2017-2018 annual report of the Director of Child and Family Services. Mr. Speaker, the 2017-2018 annual report shows a broad range of statistical data and trends relating to the number of children and families who have had interactions with our system through either child protection or prevention services. I would like to highlight some of these trends for you, which can be found in more detail within the report. The rate of children under 16 years of old receiving services is decreasing, whereas the rate of children 16 to 18 years of old receiving services is increasing. The proportion of children removed from their home is decreasing. The rate of voluntary service agreements is increasing. The rate of children in permanent care is decreasing. Mr. Speaker, the report shows that over the past 10 years, more children are remaining in care of their parents while families receive services. For example, in 2008-2009, only 19% of children were receiving services in their home, but in 2017-2018, 30% of children received services while remaining in the care of their families. Supporting families to keep them together is a priority, and these figures show that we are successfully doing this more often now than we did before. In April 1, 2016, as a result of the changes to the Child and Family Services Act, extended support service agreements were introduced so that youth reaching the age of 19 who had been in permanent care could continue to receive needed support services as young adults up to the age of 23. The number of youth taking up these services has steadily grown, and in 2017-2018, 78% of young adults leaving permanent custody chose to sign on to receive continuing supports and services. In total, there were 27 young adults who had voluntarily signed an extended support service agreement in 2017-2018. Mr. Speaker, plan of care agreements are also used by the Child and Family Services system with families in which there is a child protection concern and the family wants to work collaboratively to address the concern. In 2017-2018, 37% of children receiving services were subject to a plan of care agreements, as this number has remained steady over the past decade. One area that has increased significantly over the past 10 years, Mr. Speaker, is the rate of children and families receiving support through voluntary service agreements. Voluntary service agreements are designed to strengthen families and support the healthy development and wellness of children and youth. In 2017-2018, 27% of all children receiving services did so through a voluntary service agreement. Mr. Speaker, over the past several years, we have been focusing on building a culture of quality and improving services and outcomes for children and their families in the Child and Family Services system by engaging in an internal audit process. The 2017-18 annual audit report includes a summary of the most recent annual internal audit. It's clear through our internal audit results that workers are focusing on prevention services, as we have a high volume of voluntary service agreements, support service agreements, and extended support service agreements. Child and Family Services workers have noted that these agreements build positive relationships with families and encourage them to reach out when they need support services. The internal audit also shows areas where we clearly need to improve, as there were insufficient compliance rates on many audited items across the Child and Family Services system. Interviews with lawful caregivers and children are not consistently being done in accordance with our policies and standards. Critical information for assessing the suitability of foster care services is not always completed or up to date. File organization and documentation also needs improvement. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge our weaknesses and we're moving towards improving the system and supporting Child and Family Services workers' capacity to effectively deliver services that meet the needs of children and families requiring Child and Family Services. Finally, Mr. Speaker, The report includes a summary of major developments and future directions for Child and Family Services system. This section of the report helps to inform our residents about the work going into system-wide improvement, including the implementation of new standards and practices. Mr. Speaker, this work is primarily guided by Building Stronger Families, an action to transform Child and Family Services, which was released in 2014 and is now going into its 5th year of implementation. The Building Stronger Families Action Plan was developed in response to an external audit of the Child and Family Services system in 2014. Mr. Speaker, through Building Stronger Families, we have taken action to transform and improve the quality of child and family services for our children, youth, and their families. This includes the introduction of tools to support staff decision-making and case management, as well as improvements to system-wide information systems. These actions, as well as other work to train, support frontline staff, strengthen our quality assurance process to ensure that continuous improvement is embedded in our Child and Family Services system. While we have put in place the building blocks for a stronger system, I recognize that there is still significant challenges that we need to address. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of the Child and Family Services workers. They are required to intervene in extremely difficult and complex situations. Their workload is high, and staff is called upon to balance an overarching need to protect children and youth from abuse and or neglect while paying close attention to other critically important principles and values, including the importance of keeping a child within their family or extended family. Child and Family Services workers need the support of supervisors, managers, and senior managers, and they also rely on an array of resources, including but not limited to foster families, extended families, and specialized care providers and supports. I'd like to thank our staff for their work over the past year, which was well represented in the 2017-2018 annual report. Mr. Speaker, while there are many challenges ahead for the Child and Family Services system, I have no doubt that we will continue to progress as a system and as a society to make a real difference in the lives of children, youth, families across the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Yellowknife voters have chosen strong business-oriented leadership for their City Council. I'm looking forward to working with them for community prosperity, not only in economic terms, but also for healing and recovery for our most vulnerable residents. Previous City Councils have been valuable partners with the N.W.T and nonprofit organizations offering services to this population, and I hope that will continue. Services to the downtown population of intoxicated individuals took a huge step forward last month when the Sobering Centre and Day Centre programs opened together under one roof in my riding. The new combined facility is more than just a place out of the cold. In addition to expanded services for bathrooms, showers, and laundry, it is the new storefront access to health and social services programs, offering help to those ready to deal with addictions and find a way off the street. This is a huge and welcome shift. With additional staff on site, clients can access programs for healing, anger management, and healthy relationships, as well as take part in activities. The combined location provides a focal point for partnerships with the city's outreach program, the RCMP, and the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation, among others. All of this flows from an understanding that our fellow citizens are suffering and that non-judgmental support can reduce the harms of addictions, poverty, and homelessness. I realize that high levels of street intoxication are a concern to all of us. As the MLA for Yellowknife's downtown riding, I field a lot of public concerns. I want to remind people that these problems are not the result of the presence of the day shelter, and that services must be offered where clients are found. The first day shelter was created as an effective response to a lack of a safe place to warm up, eat, and use the bathroom. Since the opening of the new centre, efforts have been made to tune up coordination of services to effectively direct clients to the centre. I congratulate the Minister of Health and Social Services for championing the need for continually improved services and getting the program resources that are so hard to find. I'll have questions for the Minister on where we go from here. Merci.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin, the member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we live in a time when technology is changing many aspects of life. In many areas, this is beneficial, but elsewhere it's causing significant disruption, in particular, the loss of jobs. Mining is a good example. What was once a dirty industry by every measure is now cutting edge through the use of innovation and technology. Mr. Speaker, some of the world's largest mining companies, including Rio Tinto, are moving to what is termed intelligent mining. Automation is taking over underground excavators, and electric vehicles are being used. A process called X-ray diffraction is replacing core drilling to conduct metallurgic sampling to follow mineral veins. At the surface, the ore is being sorted by both sensor and magnet-based applications, which separate the valuable product from the waste. So what does our future look like, Mr. Speaker? As we look ahead, we need to embrace and fulfill our critical infrastructure needs. But we also need to look beyond traditional bricks and mortar and invest meaningfully in our future workforce. Significant effort has already been undertaken by the Department of Education, Culture and Employment through the Skills for Success program. It identifies thousands of jobs that will be required in the coming years. In order to match the innovating ways of industry, these jobs will require a new assessment of skills. More than half the occupations in the N.W.T, as we know them today, will undergo a significant skills overhaul in the next 10 years. The gap between the demands of the future workplace and the skills of our current workforce is daunting. The N.W.T as a whole, including other orders of government, along with business and industry, need to recognize this shared challenge. We must address it in order to equip our next generation workforce with the skills they need to find the jobs of tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, our future economic prosperity is not simply about retraining. It's about cultivating lifelong learning. This is how we will build a future for the next generation of Northerners. As technology and innovation continues to evolve, our willingness to understand and adapt and inspire must follow. Mr. Speaker, I believe that investing today in the skills that will unlock future prosperity is the smart way to prepare our young people for the future. At the appropriate time, I'll have questions for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin, the member South 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advancing our SA2 health care. Mr. Speaker, the official opening for the SA2 Regional Health and Long-Term Care Facility by the Minister Abernathy for Health and Social Services, Minister Schumann for the Infrastructure Department was held on August the 27th in Norman Wells. Mr. Speaker, over the past couple of months, our region's medical clients and elders have come to realize improved primary health care and a modernized single accommodation. Mr. Speaker, the region has seen significant positions from this modern building, and long-term care wings will accommodate 16 clients with 2 reservations. Mr. Speaker, to date, one wing is fully operational. It is truly overwhelming to see the smiles of our elders when visiting this nice facility. More importantly, as we draw closer to the winter road season, neighboring community relatives can easily visit their loved ones. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of operational progress, later I will have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services on the second wing. Massey.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin, the member Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize the contributions of candidates to our local elections. Yesterday, many communities in the Northwest Territories had their polling days, and it was amazing to see the results, particularly because so many women were elected. And the Legislative Assembly has made getting women into politics and changing our dismal statistics a key priority of our mandate and a key priority of the 18th Assembly. And if yesterday's results were anything to look at, I think we are starting to turn the corner in the Northwest Territories and seeing more women rise to positions of leadership within their communities. Mr. Speaker, I'll highlight a few of our newly elected women leaders in the territories. Here in the city of Yellowknife, Rebecca Alty was elected Mayor of Yellowknife. She is joined on council by Shauna Morgan, Cynthia Mufunde-Dizia, and Stacey Smith. That represents 3 out of 8 total council seats, which is 30% of the council, which meets the goals that many democracies have put for themselves in transformative change for women's leadership in politics. And I really commend all those councillors for coming forward. But it doesn't stop in just the capital city, Mr. Speaker. In Fort Smith, Mayor Lynn Napier-Buckley has been re-elected, another woman leader. Jessica Cox, Ann Pishinger, and Louise Bolio are all elected to council as well, another 30% margin. So they have met their goal as well. In Hay River, Candace Jameson has been acclaimed. Linda Duford, Mary Emily Chambers, and Sandra Lester have all been elected to council. And that's another 3 out of 8. So we're doing really well, Mr. Speaker. In Fort Smith, Lisa McPherson, Marie Lafferty, and Celine Antoine have all been elected. And in Inuvik, Natasha Kulikowski has become the new mayor, along with Alana Merrow and Reagan Solotki on council. Mr. Speaker, these are great results and really encouraging for our future. And I hope we can look forward to a 19th Assembly when we see more women being successful in contesting ridings and bringing their input, their views, and their diversity and inclusion into this chamber. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. When a constituent talked to me in the summer with concerns about wait times for audiology services, I did a little research, and there's definitely cause for concern. Data supplied to me by the Minister of Health and Social Services shows a trend of mounting demand and longer waiting times. In April 2014, there were 10 adult patients waiting for up to a week. A year later, 152 patients were waiting 26 weeks. Wow. As of April this year, 180 patients were waiting 38 weeks. As bad as the adult backlog is for audiology, it's even worse for children. The wait times for children have ballooned from 16 weeks in April 2014 to 70 weeks in April 2018, with 64 children on the wait list. Imagine 70 weeks waiting for an appointment. A child can go an entire school year without being tested or assisted with hearing difficulties. This is totally unacceptable. It is my understanding that our audiology services are also provided to some Western Nunavut communities. Travel clinics are also held in 9 N.W.T. Communities. Other patients travel to Yellowknife or Inuvik for testing. When positions are full, we should have a staff of 3 audiologists and or hearing aid practitioners. Not surprisingly, a combination of staff vacancies seems to have triggered the backlog, and it's been difficult to cut wait times when demand for services has also increased by almost 25% over the last 8 years. The minister has informed me that there should be a significant improvement in wait times with the staffing of the vacant position in Inuvik. I'm not holding my breath and felt compelled to raise the issue of wait times for audiology here today. I have a couple of suggestions for the minister to consider given the wait times for audiology. Firstly, could the funds not expended for vacant positions be spent on locums? Secondly, I was surprised to learn that we have a huge audiology service backlog dating back to 2014-15. Obviously, there's a need for greater disclosure of wait times across all medical services to ensure accountability and better focus our limited resources. Later today, I'll have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services on the unacceptably high wait times for audiology services and how we can improve public disclosure and planning for wait times across all of our medical services. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Tuna de Wolade.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to talk about environmental conservation in the Northwest Territories and the need to include Indigenous governments in this effort. Earlier this year, the federal government earmarked in its budget an unprecedented amount of money that's geared towards environmental conservation, $1.3 billion over 5 years to be exact. This investment is reflective of the federal government's pledge to safeguard at least 17% of Canada's lands and waterways by 2020. Mr. Speaker, it's a very welcome investment that our environment desperately needs. However, in order to fulfill these conservation targets, all sectors of our society and all levels of government must step up to help with these efforts. That means a country cannot afford to have any of our partners sit this one out. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, our federal government can recognize that it is acting accordingly, because part of the planned use of this $1 billion+ investment is to work closer with Indigenous governments in a way that both addresses reconciliation and provides further protection in Canada's most vital ecosystems. Mr. Speaker, Indigenous-led conservation efforts are reshaping Canadians understand and practice environmental conservation because the importance of Indigenous knowledge has never been in a stronger position. This has been demonstrated across the country, from the creation of the Great Bear Rainforest on the coast of British Columbia to the creation of the Torngat Mountain National Park in Labrador. Moreover, closer to home, efforts are being put forward within the N.W.T. We see this with the creation of a Desjay protected area in Detro and the Thai-Denanana National Park near Tlutsalke and the Nihasnitana from Tlutsalke. Mr. Speaker, N.W.T is perfectly positioned to work with the federal government to train guardians of the land. Both governments can work together at the renewable resource officer level, even supporting education of guardians and park officers alongside renewable resource officer at Aurora College in Fort Smith. Mr. Speaker, I feel it is the right time to bring guardians into the N.W.T to safeguard land and water and to support industry by providing certainty and ensuring that all sectors of renewable resource projects are environmentally responsible and sustainable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godin and the member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this past Saturday, I had the honor of attending the grand opening of the brand new Marine Training Centre in Hay River. There's been some secrecy surrounding the centre, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. But I checked out the facility, I spoke with the staff, and Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that it's the real deal. Even though people have inhabited the area since time immemorial, the town of Hay River, as it exists today, exists because of marine shipping and commercial fishing. With both industries experiencing a resurgence, the training centre couldn't come at a better time. It's operated by the Nunavut Fishers and Marine Training Consortium, a non-profit organization which has its headquarters in Iqaluit and has been doing this type of work for years. The centre is located in the old NTCL headquarters on Vail Island. That building sat vacant for many years, but now the centre is bringing new life into the area. The first floor has been completely renovated and looks brand new. The classrooms are bright and roomy with plenty of space to spread out nautical charts. There are multiple bridge simulators, each housed in its own room, that can create a variety of environments. The two I saw demonstrated were New York Harbor and the ferry crossing in Sigachik. They also have a full array of brand new gear and one small craft, and a larger multi-purpose craft to assist with hands-on training may be on the way in the near future. I talked to the staff and they were all very excited about the grand opening. They have many decades of on-the-water experience between them, and they bring that into the classroom. What impressed me the most is that they're aware that not everyone learns the same, and they're able to adapt their teaching styles, even teaching basic life skills if needed. Even though they just had their grand opening, they've actually been offering courses for the past few months, and not just in Hay River. But they have put them on or have courses planned for the Hay River Reserve, Fort Resolution, Inuvik, and Tuk. Current and upcoming courses include Fishing Master 4, Small Vessel Operator Proficiency, Marine Basic First Aid, and the Bridge Watch Rating Program, which allows those with little to no marine experience to become certified deckhands, and more courses than that, actually, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the courses are all free of charge. Now, if this statement sounds like an advertisement, it's because it is. I want to get the word out so that everyone across the N.W.T knows and can take advantage of this great new facility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statements. Member statements. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Trinidad-Willowdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thought I'd take the opportunity to recognize the two people interpreting from my writing, Mr. Tom Unka, that's interpreting in Dennis Oslina and Chippewan, and Rose Sundberg, who is interpreting in a Dogrib language, Willowdale. Thank you.
Massey. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Acknowledgments. Acknowledgments. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll go first. Mr. Speaker, today I spoke about the next generation workforce. My questions today are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Mr. Speaker, my statement, as I mentioned, was talking about the need that we have in order to address the educational and skills gap due to the advancement of innovation and technology. So I'd like to ask the Minister, can the Minister describe how the Skills for Success program is helping us prepare for the future of work for our young people in these days of, call it, massive technological change? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Skills for Success document is actually, in my opinion, a great document, actually. It was done in partnership with the Conference Board of Canada, and it was a 15-year forecast of the jobs that will be needed within the territories. So it's really important. There was a lot of work done with this. The member was right. The occupations are changing. The way we do jobs is changing. And so this is really critical. And so we're using this document to look at all of our educational programming and our training programs throughout the territories. We're also using it in our high schools within our pathways to help guide children on deciding what education they need to be able to achieve their career goals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Nakita Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for her reply. And I too agree that Skills for Success is a great program, and but like many programs, we've got to be able to have the ability to adapt on the fly when need be. I know that the Minister said previously, and I believe in the House yesterday, that she wasn't necessarily qualified to design educational programs, and that's understandable, and prefers to leave that to the experts. But will she agree that, as Minister, she will lead the department to anticipate technological and workplace change to prepare our students for the future work that will be very different in the future? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to clarify about yesterday for sure. Yeah, I did make that comment, and I should clarify, it's not that I can't make decisions. I can make decisions. I can decide whatever I want to decide. The reality is I don't believe in doing that. I believe in best practices. Best practices means that you get the most qualified people around to give me advice to make strong political decisions. So I'll correct that as to start with. And then absolutely, like I had stated in the first answer, the Skills for Success is a very progressive document, in my opinion, and I will be using that document, and I'll be giving direction to all of our, anyone that works with education, culture, and employment, that they use that document, the forecast of what's going on, the changes within the job market, for developing any programs, any courses that we offer. So yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Tada Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that reply. I'm wondering, can the minister commit that given that the potential for potentially a new educational institute in the form of a polytechnic university for the Northwest Territories might move ahead, that she will seek to build partnerships, but in particular with business and industry as well as with academia to help keep education for Northerners ahead of the curve, especially with the advancements of technology and innovation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At one time in my life, there was a time when I thought I could do it all alone. I'm almost 60 years old, and I've realized that that's wrong. I do need people around me to provide me support. And so, yes, it's really important, actually, that we engage with all partners, the labor force, academia, everyone that has a stake in this. We cannot do this alone in isolation. This has to be a comprehensive, inclusive strategy as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for her commitment to wanting to build relationships. These will be critical as we move ahead. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I spoke about a new initiative to combine traditional ways of knowing with modern design and innovation to create new, let's call it, knowledge clusters. Can the Minister talk about the importance of incorporating traditional knowledge with the new technologies to create a uniquely northern system of lifelong learning? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to try not to make this answer too long because I can go on talking about traditional knowledge for all day because I believe it's important to take that into consideration. This is the knowledge of our people. This is the knowledge of people that have brought history. It's not today's knowledge, it's historical knowledge that people have learned from. So we need to incorporate that into it. And I'm going to use a concrete example, if I may, Mr. Speaker. When I was the Minister of Housing, I went up north to one of the communities and we had built some seniors complexes. And because mainstream knowledge had said build them along the street so that it looks nice from the street, we built them along the street. The reality is the people within that community kept saying, don't build them that way because the wind blows and it will be a problem. We never listened. And you know what happened, Mr. Speaker? The wind blew. We couldn't open the back doors. So yes, we need to incorporate traditional knowledge in what we do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We always learn the hard way, too. Oral question, Canada member Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. My statement applauded the way we've upped our game with the new Day and Sobering Centre, increasing the delivery of harm reduction and extending the hand of treatment and support. First, we'll need to see how this new setup is working out and adjust delivery if needed. So how does the Minister plan to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of this new program delivery model? Masi.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her statement. I think opening of the Sobering Centre Day Shelter was an important day in Yellowknife, an important day for the downtown core, and I thank her and all the residents of Yellowknife for their support on this. I know there are some challenges, and we are certainly focused on safety of both our clients, our staff, as well as residents of the community, so we continue on to evolve. There is a number of different ways we hope to get some information, Mr. Speaker. We have put in place a telephone number that residents in the neighborhood could call to express their concerns so that we can hear from our neighbors and modify delivery to ensure that we are maintaining that safety that we're talking about. We also have a contract with the N.W.T Disabilities Council. We're requiring them, and we've asked them to maintain some tracking of the individuals that are attending, how often, what kind of usage we're getting. We also have Health and Social Services staff going in there to utilize the front room for some of the reach out to some of the clients who are in there. And we're putting in some evaluation mechanisms to monitor whether or not that is actually providing value in the services that the people are expecting and needing. We're also outside of the evaluation, we're also working with other providers around town, like the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation, who's using some of the program space in that facility to provide different types of programs on a rotating basis to meet the needs of some of our clients. So we'll continue to monitor what's happening in that building, and I look forward to having more discussions with the member and members about this particular facility and how it's evolving and working or not working as time goes on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nakirere Kasi, member Yellowknife Center.
Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for that answer. I think that monitoring and evaluation is very important to service delivery, and I think that there are a number of jurisdictions watching this sobering centre to see what in fact we're able to accomplish here. I understand that the resolution of addictions is a difficult thing to manage or to measure, but I hope the Minister will do his best. Since the opening of the new facility, I've received calls from concerned neighbours immediately adjacent to the new day shelter, and I think one of the things that would help is increase coordination with the street outreach program to more proactively move people in distress off the street and into the sobering centre. Can the Minister say where we are on this suggestion? Merci.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've previously indicated, safety is a primary concern for us as we work to deliver the services through this sobering centre day shelter. That's safety for our staff, safety for the residents, the clients, but also safety for the neighbours who live or work immediately adjacent. We have put in the telephone number, we've shared it with neighbours, and we've asked them to please use the number. We need to hear their experiences, we need to learn from their experiences in order to improve what is happening around that facility. With respect to street outreach, there is a Safe Ride program who is doing a significant amount of work, and I believe they've also been working with some of the individuals who utilize that facility to do more cleaning and other things around the facility so that bottles that are discarded are picked up more often. Our challenge obviously is people who are using the facility, it's on a voluntary basis. People who are participating in these programs, it's on a voluntary basis. I think there's been really great uptake. And I really applaud the NGOs who have been, championing this and leading this. But there are some challenges, and we can't mandate those activities at this point. But we would like to be supportive as much as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tarare Kasi, member Yellowknife Center.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister touched on a complaint that I have had often, which has to do with the increased amount of litter surrounding the centre. And so to deal with this, I've suggested a more focused application of the Common Ground Litter Pickup Program. Although I've heard that the money for this is sunsetting. Can the Minister say whether support has or could be given to extend this program, or whether there's another idea for picking up litter downtown? Merci.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, I don't know where we are in the financial situation with respect to that program. I believe that program is being run by an NGO, and it has been a very valuable program. We did have an opportunity to meet with some of the members' constituents early on, and they talked about how much cleaner the area out in front of Northern Heights had been over the last year that this program was underway. I will certainly look into it, Mr. Speaker. I think the program has value. I don't want to obviously step on another funder's toes, but if there's an opportunity to work together, I'm certainly happy to explore it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nodire Kasi, member Yellowknife Center.
Speaker, finally, as I noted in my statement, harm reduction is the motivating philosophy of the creation of this centre, and to increase services for people who are homeless and or addicted. In the past, we've talked about the possibility of a managed alcohol program, and I'm wondering if the Minister can comment on where this proposal stands. Will we see it in the life of this Assembly? Merci.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've said it in the House before, and I'll say it again. I'm committed to having the Department of Health and Social Services explore the possibility of implementing a managed alcohol program here in Yellowknife as a pilot or a trial. a year after the Sobering Centre Day Shelter has been opened. I'm still committed to that. I still think that's incredibly important. We have seen that the managed alcohol program does work in other jurisdictions. I had an opportunity to visit a managed alcohol program in Ottawa, which is getting some really great results. The challenge that I'm now faced with, and we'll certainly be looking for ways to remedy this, is the Sobering Centre Day Shelter is not a residence. Many of the managed alcohol programs are residential programs. So we're going to have to explore how to do that, and I've committed to doing that a year after the Sobering Centre opens, so we have some opportunity to learn about it, the clients, what they're looking for, what supports they would like to see. But I do believe there's definitely value in this initiative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nikada Canada member Trinity Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as per my member statement, I have questions for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources. My first question is, other than Lutzelke, are there other Indigenous communities in the N.W.T that have informed ENR of their interest to launch programs such as Nihas Nitana? Thank you.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have not heard of any interest from any other communities. However, that could change. Member mentioned in his member statement that there was some federal funding that was announced, and I believe the 2017-18 budget there was $25 million committed over 5 years to support a pilot national Indigenous guardianship program. That's for all of Canada. So we're in the process of putting some funding requests into the Nature Fund to see if we can access some of that funding. And I'm sure as the Indigenous governments and the communities become more aware of the program and the existing of the program and the possible funding pots, then there should be more interest in this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nikada Cassie member Trinity Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Minister that $25 million set aside for proposals. I don't know what the end result of that was, but at this point, the larger amount of money that has been put forward by the federal government of $1.3 billion, I've had all kinds of ideas for it, but I'd like to ask the Minister if the Department of ENR is prepared and willing to support additional Indigenous guardianship programs should they become of interest in other regions across the territory. Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, absolutely. We'd be prepared to support additional Indigenous guardianship programs in more regions. And I should add that the SAW2, we've already offered assistance to the SAW2 region in their application for this sort of funding as well. And I mean, we believe that empowering the Indigenous guardianship program are empowering residents in Northwest Territories. And I think we're all of the opinion in this chamber that who knows the North better than the folks that live in the North. So I think the guardianship program would be an excellent program for a lot of people in Northwest Territories to provide their input and be exactly as it says, a guardian of the North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tada Cassie member Trinity Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister if the Department would consider supporting the launching of territory-wide Indigenous guardianship programs. There's many reasons, positive reasons, to have guardianship programs in all regions across the territories, and maybe even a couple of guardianship programs in a particular region. So again, would the Minister support the launching of a territorial-wide Indigenous guardianship program? Thank you.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the guardianship programs, they're best championed and developed and implemented by the Indigenous governments. The Northwest Territory, N.W.T, we'd be more than happy to play a supporting role. But these programs such as these would work a lot better if they're planned and implemented by the Indigenous governments with support from the territorial government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question. Dinta de Akasi, no de Akasi, 20 de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the minister, I heard what he just said, but will the minister commit to engaging federal government with some of the, I guess in support of some of the proposals that may come forward? What I'm asking is that we need some sort of coordination at some level, and I feel that the N.W.T is in the best position to coordinate these type of programs. They have renewable resource officers that I mentioned in there that could work hand in hand with the guardians. They could assist in training the guardians. They could work with the rangers. They could work with the various groups in the community, all designed to make sure that they're protecting the land and waterways across the territory. So would the minister engage with the federal government to assist the various guardianship programs that could potentially happen across the territory? Thank you.
Masi. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we'd be more than happy to work in partnership with the Indigenous governments in the Northwest Territories as they put proposals together for try access some of the federal funding. Members correct, the N.W.T may be best positioned sometime to have those talks with the federal government along with, I think they have a couple of residents in Northwest Territories that are part of a national organization or a national group. But again, members absolutely correct. Working in partnership with the Indigenous government, I think it's important that we as territorial government in our meetings with our counterparts in Ottawa continue to advocate for additional funding for a lot of these guardianship programs. So that was a long answer just to say yes, we'll continue to support the Indigenous governments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Oral question, the member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My statement earlier today dealt with wait times for audiology services, so I have some questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Wait times of 70 weeks for children are simply unacceptable. Can the Minister explain how this acute problem of wait times for audiology, especially children, is being addressed? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yeah, there are significant delays, or not delays, rather, wait lists for audiology. We've actually done a number of things to try to reduce that wait list, and the member has actually identified already that we have put in a third position in audiology. National levels are 5 audiologists per 100,000 people. We previously had 2.5, now we have 3. So we're slightly over that. Having said that, we still have significant wait lists. I have asked the department to begin a review with the N.W.T Health and Social Services Authority focusing on wait time and waiting list management within the audiology division. We're hoping to see the results of that review during this fiscal year so we can continue to work to make improvements and reduce some of the wait times for our residents seeking audiology. Mr. Speaker, where there are urgent needs, and I just want to be very clear on this, where there are urgent needs, priority needs, those individuals see the audiologists very quickly. It's where individuals are further down on the priority list or don't have needs that are very urgent, where we're definitely having some difficulty getting them in within the timelines we've established. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I've characterized the audiology wait times as unacceptably high, especially for children. It's my understanding that long audiology wait times can correlate with loss of cognitive function. It's not clear whether there are any professional, national, or international standards for waiting times for audiology. Can the Minister tell us whether there are any standards for audiology wait times and how we compare to other jurisdictions? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while there has been some work conducted by national committees of volunteers established by the Pan-Canadian Alliance to establish some benchmarks, there are no published standards for audiology wait times in Canada. I do know a cross-jurisdiction comparison, as I've already indicated, shows that there's about 5 audiologists required per 100,000 people. In the Northwest Territories, we have 3, which is slightly higher than that level, but one of those positions is new. And I did hear the member in his statement indicate some pessimism that it's going to make a difference. But we are trying to make those improvements by bringing in an additional position. We're optimistic that we'll be able to see some results. The N.W.T has established some standards for all of our rehabilitation services based on a scale of 1 to 5. Priority 1, 72 hours. Priority 2, 10 business days. Priority 3, 1 month. Priority 4, 2 months. Priority 5, 4 months. I can say that in the priority 1 and 2 areas, we are meeting those levels. I can't say the same for the other priority levels, and those are the areas that we're trying to address, and I think those are the areas that the member is asking about. So we are working to make improvements in those areas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that response. I mentioned that the obvious fact that vacant positions mean savings in salary expenditures. I also recommended that these unexpended funds should be devoted to locum positions wherever possible to reduce wait times. Can the Minister explain whether unexpended salary dollars for audiology can be used for locum positions and whether this is common practice for other GNWT medical services? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we use locums throughout our system on many different occasions, and we fund those locums through vacancies and through other unexpended salary dollars. We have brought in some audiology staff to provide some locums. We've also had some incredible difficulty finding people to come in and provide some of that backfill for us. We went for an extended period of time last year where we were actually unable to find somebody to provide that backfill. So I think there are some challenges at a national level to find individuals, but yes, we absolutely use some unexpended dollars to provide locums if and when we can find them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thanks again to the Minister for that. We actually did take one of those locums in, and they did house sit for us at one point. So just so you know, the Minister has often talked about the benefits of system transformation, including standardized information collection and analysis. Can the Minister tell us whether and when we can expect wait time public reporting for audiology and indeed a comprehensive selection of medical services offered across the N.W.T? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the move to a single authority model here in the Northwest Territories, recognizing that we still have two outside of the system, although they are working closely with the system, has really provided us with an opportunity to start having that discussion and actually do the work to develop some territorial standards and some abilities to track information on a consistent basis, which is great because we've had information, but it's never been presented or collected in the same way, so it's never been able to be a comparator. The N.W.T. Health and Social Services Authority is working to standardize data collection in the territory, which is obviously the first step of being able to produce reliable performance data. The authority anticipates being able to publish performance data either late in this fiscal year or early in the next fiscal year. I think this will be important for us, both in the department, in the authority, but in this House, to help us start making some evidence-based decisions on where some of our resources need to go. It's incredibly important data. I want to see it. I know you want to see it. I know members want to see it. So we will continue to work to get it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the members out too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to my member statement on the issue of operational progress for the SA2 Health and Long-Term Care Facility. My question, can the Minister of the Health and Social Services provide an update on the employment positions created by this impressive building? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the creation of the new Norman Wells long-term care facility, which I had the honour of visiting the member the member opposite for the grand opening, 37 positions were created for this long-term care facility. Currently, as of today, we have 35 of those positions filled. We have one nursing clinical coordinator, 7 LPNs, 12 resident care aides, 3 relief resident care aides, 1 clerk, 1 activity rehab aide, 6.5 housekeepers. Not sure how we have half a housekeeper. 1.5 cooks and 3 cooks assistants. There's still 2 positions we're staffing full, but we're confident that we now have enough staff in that facility to open the next wing, and we're anticipating the opening of that wing at the end of this month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council Member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister must have a mirror on the wall. That was leading to my next question on when can we expect the second wing to open up? Mirror. And adding to that question, when can we see the elderly clients moving into the second wing once it's in operation? Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, obviously we're hoping to open the next wing by the end of the month. So we should start seeing some of our residents moving into that facility in early November. There's a couple things we want to do over the remaining couple of weeks of this month. We want to make sure that all of our staff are getting the proper orientation, that they're getting the proper training, that they get an opportunity to get into the wing, into the facility, so they see how the facility operates, and get any other local training or specific job training that they need in order to provide a safe environment, a safe home for the residents of that incredible facility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Council Member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I lived in Norman Wells, I've seen the change, and I've seen in particular the change contributions created by this building, particularly with the staff and the employment and the incoming families that took the opportunity of employment. Now, adding to that, training in general, an important element for sound administration. What plans are in place or going to be in place for the staff created by the institution? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but I'll do my best. At a territorial level, we do have some standards and standard protocols that we're putting in place at a territorial level, which all of the regional operations have to adhere to when it comes to things like plans of care and different things like that. But in-house, there will be some local training, there will be some local policies and procedures that are put together by the staff of that authority. They obviously have to be consistent with the territorial policies and standards, but there's opportunity to do some custom design as well. Every building's got its own little unique features. This one's no exception. They will certainly ensure that they're providing the best services they can out of their facility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Hay River North.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to receive complaints about the service at the Hay River Regional Health Centre, and for the most part, they're the same complaints I've been receiving since day one. Some are optimistic that the Minister of Health's recent appointment of a new public administrator for the Hay River Health and Social Service Authority will spur positive change in service delivery. So I'd like to ask the Minister, what changes does he hope to see with the new public administrator? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I answer that question, I want to take an opportunity to thank our previous public administrator for all of his years of service. He certainly helped us carry us across a number of milestones in Hay River, including the amazing new facility, the work towards a single authority approach, a single system approach here in the Northwest Territories, as well as things like Woodland Manor. And I think he was a valuable contributor to making those things happen. However, having said that, a new set of eyes is always a good thing. I've had an opportunity to meet with the new public administrator to talk about Hay River, talk about the services being provided there. I've asked him to get oriented as quickly as possible, get an understanding of the lay of the land. He's also, a city councillor, so he's got a pretty good perspective of what's going on in the community. and I've asked him to get oriented, and then we'd have some further conversations about what he's seeing, what he thinks we need to be focusing on. Basically, we all want the same thing, Mr. Speaker. We want quality services for the residents of Hay River and the North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question at Kidada, Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and like Mr. McNeely, he's answered a few. The minister's answered a few of my questions already. So it's become clear that during the life of this assembly, the Hay River Authority will not be brought into the Territorial Health Authority. I mean, there isn't the political will to get it done from cabinet, and so the minister must work with the public administrator to address these recurring issues that I keep hearing about. And since the minister said that the public administrator still needs to orient himself to this, I guess they haven't made a plan, but what I'd like to see is the minister and the new administrator, Mr. Willows, sit down and create a plan with clear goals and deliverables so that people can see whether or not progress is being made. Because right now, people are frustrated and they're giving up hope about the service of health care in Hay River. So will the minister sit down with Mr. Willows and create a plan as I described? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to correct one of the member's statements. This cabinet is committed to bringing Hay River into the public service. It is one of our mandate items, and we are doing a significant amount of work to make that happen. It is a big task. It may not happen in the life of this government, but that does not mean that we're not doing important work today that is going to help make that happen in the future. I did have an opportunity to meet with Mr. Willows. We did talk about the authority, and I have provided Mr. Willows with a mandate letter outlining his role, responsibilities, and expectations as a public administrator in Hay River. The letter explains his scope of work as a public administrator and sort of articulates that in the absence of the Board of Management. The public administrator is not involved in the day-to-day activities of the operation, but provides guidance and oversight to ensure the compliance and objectives of legislation and policies and regulations are actually being met. He does also have the opportunity to provide advice to me as the minister on things that we need to do or things that are not happening in the authority so that we can make sure that they happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Kidada, Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I understand that the public administrator isn't running the day-to-day operations. But like the minister said, he can provide advice to the minister about what needs to happen. So will the minister commit to sit down with Mr. Willows and produce a document that identifies the problems in Hay River and ways to address them with clear goals and deliverables so that people can see progress is being made? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey, Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the public administrator will be required to do public meetings similar to board meetings, at which point he'll have an opportunity to explain and identify some of the things that he's seeing and witnessing in the community and hear from community residents on where their concerns are. I know the member has been very good at helping articulate some of the challenges that people are seeing in Hay River, and he has shared those with me, and we are certainly attempting to address some of those. One of the things that I think we can be happy about is there has been an awful lot of concerns about wait times and same-day appointments in Hay River, and we've tasked the CEO and the previous public administrator tasked the CEO with finding some solutions on that with some support from people throughout the community. And as of September 1st, by way of example, clinics began providing some same-day appointments, and patients can call in or walk in the mornings for appointments that day. So we are listening. We are making improvements. There are changes that are happening, and I believe that the public administrator, with some fresh eyes, is going to be able to look at some of the challenges and offer some new and unique solutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundera, Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the reason I asked about getting together and creating a plan is because the public administrator isn't responsible to this House, whereas the minister is. And in the absence of Hay River being part of the Territorial Authority, I need some sort of way to convince my constituents that we are making progress. So further to the minister's previous point, what progress is being made to bring Hay River into the Territorial Authority? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of things that need to happen. Obviously, we need to determine and quantify the cost of bringing the individuals into the public service, and specifically what I mean about that is the cost of the pensions and the cost of ensuring that those that are already receiving pensions through Hay River that have worked there over the many years are not adversely affected, but that the individuals coming into the new system, our system with Super N, are not adversely affected or penalized as a result of the pension that they provided in the past. We've had discussions in here about the pension in Hay River and how it's more of a Volkswagen than the N.W.T Cadillac, and we have to figure out how to roll those twins. We're doing that work now. We're trying to quantify what that means. That is taking a partnership between health and social services and finance. We're getting closer to having some better numbers there. But some of it still depends on our negotiations with the UNW. And we do need to have a long conversation with the UNW because they are the bargaining unit for both the N.W.T. but also Hay River, and it's two separate collective agreements. So once we have some of our financial certainty, we'll be able to have more informed conversations with the union, which will help us figure out what the ultimate costs of this transfer will be. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of moving pieces, and sometimes they move faster and then slow down, and then speed up and slow down. So we're working on it. It is important. I take the member's point. I will certainly keep the member and committee informed as we continue to move forward. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question kada Canada the member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as other members in the House have mentioned, many of my constituents have concerns with the government's carbon pricing plan. And I've taken a look at some of the statistics on emissions. And if you look at the overall emissions for commercial and residential combined, it only makes up 10% of total carbon emissions. So it doesn't seem like everyday northern families are really the ones who are creating the highest level of emissions. So I'm wondering if there's a way we can better craft a system to shield them from potential economic hardship that comes along with new pricing systems. When you look at industry, mining upstream oil and gas production accounts for 25% of emissions, whereas transportation accounts for 49%. This seems like industry is really where we need to target. So as the minister explored a cap and trade system or the potential inclusion of the N.W.T into a carbon market where we could put the onus squarely on industry who are causing most of the emissions. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during our review of carbon pricing, we did look at whether cap and trade was feasible. The analysis at the time was the N.W.T economy was too small to participate in any cap and trade program in any meaningful manner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question the member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, did the minister look into partnering with larger jurisdictions to be part of a carbon market? The province of Ontario was part of California's carbon market. They joined with Quebec. So was that proposed, or was it just looking at the N.W.T as a carbon market? Thank you.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as government of the Northwest Territories, our priority is looking after the people in the Northwest Territories. That's why we informed Ottawa that we were going to come up with a made in N.W.T approach that would help to minimize the impact that carbon pricing was going to have on residents of the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question. Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the minister. We need a Made in the North system, so I'm trying to explore other options that may have not been considered. I commend the government for actually bringing forward a plan. It's just late in the game, and people are concerned about how it's going to affect families. So can the minister share his the cap and trade analysis they've done with this House, or release it publicly so we can see the analysis and see exactly what was considered? Thank you.
Minister of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, the federal government come up with carbon pricing. Our job was to adjust. I think the government of Northwest Territories and the folks have done a great job at mitigating some of the impact going to have on residents in Northwest Territories. As far as the cap and trade analysis, I'll have a look to see if that document exists, and if it does, I'll be more than happy to share it with members. But again, I go back to the fact that we are finding a made in the N.W.T. approach. We recognize there was going to be hardship in the family. We had what we heard document, we had a number of comments from across Northwest Territories. A lot of folks across the Northwest Territories are wondering what's going to be on their table tomorrow morning for breakfast, and I think we've taken steps to help address the impact that it's going to have on families in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that the minister that there are offsets and rebates in the carbon pricing proposal. However, industry, who are our largest emitters, seems to have many very high rebates built into it. So I'd like to ask the minister if he feels that, or what the priority was in the carbon pricing plan. Was it on the everyday family, the people who are producing only 10% of emissions, or was the focus really to work with industry to lower those emissions and to bring us to the standard that we need to be at to reduce temperatures moving into the future? Thank you.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're trying to find a balanced approach. Of course, industry in the Northwest Territories, which is very important to the Northwest Territories and our economy, are some of the biggest emitters in the Northwest Territories, so we wanted to work out a program that would benefit them. But it goes without saying in this chamber that the people in Northwest Territories are our priority. And mitigating the impact on the people in Northwest Territories, I think it's something the government's done a fairly good job at. We rolled out our approach to carbon pricing, so there's a lot of information out there for those that are curious as to what the impact might be on them. So again, we need to find a balanced approach that works for industry and more importantly works for people in Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Canada Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a few questions for the Minister responsible for the Housing Corporation. Mr. Speaker, in the past, we've had some successful projects in the Mackenzie Delta, mainly Sigachik and Port McPherson, with the building of 3 log homes, 2 of which went to private homeowners, and 1 is now a RCMP residence. So I'd like to ask the Minister, is the Housing Corporation open to pilot projects in the Mackenzie Delta to build log homes? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, I do know that building log homes have been done in the past up in the region, and there were some successful projects with that. If we were going to look at such a pilot or a project moving forward, they would have to meet national building codes, first and foremost. And also, as you know, we have had some debate in this House in the last government, this government, about even just modular and stick homes. And that's another concern for residents up in our region. But if we were going to look at log homes, it would be having to meet the national building codes. Also the costs, it could be very expensive getting logs and getting that kind of work put together when you compare it to modular or stick-built. And as you know, and as I've said in this House since we started session, all communities are going to do some community housing plans, look at priorities, where they want to go. As members also know, we do have a community housing support initiative that we are working with community governments, Indigenous governments, to look at unique and innovative ways to address housing needs in our communities. And if we were going to look at that, I'd say that program, the Community Housing Initiative, might be the one to look at, and I will have more discussions with the member, and hope that he brings that back to his leaders to discuss. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister touched a bit on my next question, but I'd like to ask In the past, residents were able to put in sweat equity. Would the department continue with their past practices? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we want to work with all our communities, our stakeholders, residents in the N.W.T. And one of the programs that we have here that's been working very well here in Yellowknife is working with Habitat for the N.W.T. And we want to make sure that we want to try to get that program out to outside of Yellowknife. And first community we're looking at is actually Beshico. And if we can get people in the regions, in the small communities to work on something like the Habitat for Humanity projects, then definitely we'll look into that. And, you know, each community is going to be different from the next. And if the community of Fort McPherson, Aklavik, or Sigachik have some kind of idea, we'd be more than willing to work with them. And as I mentioned, with the community housing support initiatives, works through some kind of project through that initiative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tadadea Cassie, member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister touched a little bit on the National Building Code. And Mr. Speaker, as we have wood misers in both Fort McPherson and Sigachik, we have the capability of doing log homes in line with the National Building Code. So will the minister support this initiative to provide log homes in our communities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
As I mentioned, the Community Housing Support Initiative is I think, the program that would well suit what the member is asking. We would be willing to sit down with leadership, sit down with contractors, sit down with the member. We do have some good partnerships in some of his communities already. And as I mentioned, one good partnership that we have is with a lot of our Indigenous organizations, IRC, Salt River First Nations are a couple that I can think of, and we'd be more than willing to sit down with the member and his leadership to try to look at addressing some of the housing needs. But as I mentioned, you got to look at the cost. You got to look at what is going to be more efficient and better for his residents, and those are discussions we can have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good minute.
Massey. Oral question, the member Tune.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have questions for the Minister of Lands. Mr. Speaker, the Minister wrote to priorities and planning on management of unauthorized occupancy in the Northwest Territories. I have some questions for the Minister. Has the Minister rolled out the cabin type lease at this point? Thank you.
Massey. Minister of Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department has developed a new cabin type lease that will be implemented on both territorial and commissioners' lands. This will support greater consistency between the two management regimes. So we're expecting to roll that out in the fall of this year. Thank you.
Massey. Oral question, member Tune.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the options for unauthorized occupants is to take the government to court. And I would like to ask the Minister if going to court over unoccupied authorization includes cabins that are out in the hinterland, like just the regular traditional pursuit cabins. Thank you.
Massey. Minister of Lands.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned yesterday, we're trying to determine which cabins are unauthorized and which are rights-based. We've considered them all untenured, and we want to find out from initially the Aboriginal groups which are actually rights-based. So that is our first step in this effort. Again, as I mentioned yesterday, there are more than 700 cabins or properties out there that are of concern, and we want to know which fall into which category. So that's our first step. Thank you.
Masi. Oral question, Tada Deakas, member Tuna de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in cases where the government considers unauthorized occupants are then going through the stages and are then taken to court, and the occupant uses Aboriginal and treaty rights as a defense, can the minister advise us if those cases would be put on hold until the lands and resources negotiations are settled? Thank you.
Minister of Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We realize, of course, that there are unauthorized and rights-based properties that we're going to be dealing with, and that different defenses could be raised in both cases. So we're going to be extremely cautious in moving ahead with court cases in either of these situations. And however, I can't give a total undertaking that we will not proceed. Thank you.
Oral question, Nundere Akasi, member Tuna de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in that letter, the minister advised priorities in planning that there is an evaluation process. The evaluation process has various steps. In the letter, the minister indicated that steps 1, 2, and 3 will begin in the fall of 2018. We're well into the fall of 2018. I'd like to ask the minister if the evaluation process of the unauthorized occupants has begun. Thank you.
Masi. Minister of Lands.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned yesterday, we have written to Aboriginal groups that is really a first step in this process. We are waiting to hear back from them. We sent a very extensive number of letters out to a large number of IGOs. We're waiting to hear back from them. So that's really the first step. I understand that I will be before committee at the end of October, and I could perhaps prepare and explain where we are in the whole process at that time. Thank you.
Masi. Oral question, Ikeda Canyon, the member Yellowknife Center.
Mr. Speaker, now that the Minister of Health has recovered from all his questions, I have a few more. He's well informed about the situation of a constituent of mine who has ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Recently, people in Yellowknife held a major fundraiser to meet his expenses now that his disease has progressed where he needs a lot of different kinds of support. He's not eligible for public support for his condition because it's not listed in our medical health insurance program. So my question for the minister is whether he can explain how it's possible that such a serious and not completely uncommon condition could not be eligible for treatment. Masi.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, the member is correct. ALS is not one of the conditions covered under our specified disease conditions under our supplemental health program. But I do want to make it clear that unlike many other jurisdictions, things like home care are actually part of our services that we do provide. And we are working with clients and residents who have different specified diseases such as ALS, providing them things like home care and other services that they wouldn't get or they'd have to pay for in other jurisdictions. Having said that, the specified disease condition is just one of our programs that focus on things like prescription drugs and sometimes medical supplies and these types of things. Currently, most of our programs are tied to the non-insured health benefits program. And ALS is not something that's covered by NIHB. We're trying to move away from having a specified disease condition program here in the Northwest Territories. I agree with the member. It doesn't seem to capture some of our residents who are in the highest level of need, and that it should be based on condition or on individuals' ability and needs rather than a specified condition. So we are doing some work to modify our supplemental health programs. Much of the work is going to occur in the life of this Assembly, but it probably won't be until the next Assembly that some decisions need to be made around that. I do hear the members' frustration. I share that frustration. And we will certainly work with individuals to ensure that they're getting as much supports as they can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Akira Cassie, member, Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, there's lots of good news in that answer. I mean, the fact is that if I had the misfortune to walk out of here and get hit by a truck and I needed a wheelchair, no one would question my eligibility for that. But my constituent who has this terrible progressive disease has to make a case for it. Having said that, the Minister and his staff have been helpful coordinating with the ALS Society of Alberta in providing services to this person. So as an alternative to the specified condition, is it possible to create something like a catastrophic disease fund where somebody who has a progressive disease that has very high needs over a short period of time might be able to access help? Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in reviewing what is provided by other jurisdictions across this country, it's been clear to us that no other jurisdiction actually has coverage for ALS either. Fortunately, in other jurisdictions, they do have ALS societies that, have done incredible work to support people with ALS by getting them the equipment they need, often on a loaner basis. We don't have an ALS society here in the Northwest Territories, but the Alberta ALS Society has been a significant partner for individuals in the Northwest Territories who are struggling with ALS. Having said that, I take the member's point, and we have had conversations about upgrading our supplementary health programs, modifying them, changing them. We're doing that work. I think the member's suggestion is certainly one that we have to consider and will be incorporated in discussions around the future of supplemental health programs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Taladea Cassie, member, Yellowknife Centre.
Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that response. Minister, as the Minister may know, this is a disease without a cure. The debilitation continues to progress, sometimes quickly and sometimes not. Both of my paternal aunts died of this disease. I've seen it up close. What is the Minister's plan for this individual going forward in terms of providing him with the care he needs so that he has the best quality of life for his time remaining? Masi.
Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to discuss an individual's plan of care on the House of this Assembly. I don't think it's the appropriate place. The member and I, as well as other members who have been provided consent by the family, have had some discussions. I'm certainly happy to sit down with any of the members that have received consent from the family, and I'm happy to meet with the family again to discuss where we are. We've had a discussion with the family previously, but I am definitely not about to start talking about an individual's plan of care on the the floor of this Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundere Cassie, member, Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the Minister's response. My final question is whether the Minister can give us an indication of how many people in the N.W.T have been diagnosed with ALS. Masi.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I know the current number in the Northwest Territories. I can't tell the member how many people over time have had ALS. The number is quite small, and given the fact that it's small, it might be statistically inappropriate for me to throw that number out. But I'm happy to have a sit down with the member and let her know how many individuals are currently living with ALS in the Northwest Territories. I say that recognizing that the media has already interviewed both the individuals or their families, so we know how many individuals there are out there, but I'm not prepared to say it at this time. Except I did just say both. Whatever. 2.
Masi. That oral questions. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to report to the Assembly that the Standing Committee on Government Operations has reviewed Bill 8, Emergency Management Act, and that Bill 8 is now ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Reports on Committee on Review of Bills. Reports on the Committee on Review of Bills. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 64, Bracket 2 of the Liquor Act, I wish to table the following document entitled Northwest Territories Liquor Commission 64th Annual Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled the 2017-2018 Annual Report of the Director of Child and Family Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Member for Yellowknife Centre.
That on Thursday, October 18th, 2018, I will move the following motion. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Great Slave, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on October 18th, 2018, it shall be adjourned until Tuesday, October 23rd, 2018. And further, that any time prior to October 23rd, 2018, if the Speaker is satisfied after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice and shall transact its business as it has been duly adjourned to that time. Massey, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Notices of motion for first reading bills. Notices of motion for first reading bills. Motions. Motions. First reading bills. First reading bills. Second reading bills. Second reading bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole Bills and Other Matters. Bill 7, Minister Statement 19-18.3, Table Document 215-18.3, with Member Hay River North in the chair.
I'll call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the chair rise and report progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. There's a motion to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will rise and report progress. Thank you.
May I have the report, Member Hay River North?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Bill 7, Chartered Professional Accountants Act, Minister's Statement 19-18 brackets 3 Aurora College Foundational Review Process, and Table Document 215-18 brackets 3 Capital Estimates 2019-2020. I would like to report progress, and Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Merci. Do I have a second there? Member for Cam Lake. Motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Merci. Third reading of bills. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Range Lake, that Bill 13, an act to amend the Securities Act be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member requested for a recorded vote. Motion's in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Tabacha, the member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunada-Welladay, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave, the member for Yellowknife South, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Massey. All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The result of the vote, 15 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion is carried. Bill 13 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Range Lake, that Bill 14, Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Act 2018, be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister requests a recorded vote. The motion's in order. To the motion. Oh, sorry. Minister of Justice.
Question, do we need to add the words "as amended"? I'm told no. Thank you.
Okay. You were just told no. Okay, motion's in order. There's been a request for a recorded vote. Question's been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Tabacha, the member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunada-Welladay, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave, the member for Yellowknife South, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Massey. All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The result of the vote, 15 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 14 has had a third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the honourable member for Range Lake, that Bill 15, Document Formalization Service and Notice Reform Statute Law Amendment Act, be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member requested a recorded vote. Motion's in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Tabacha, the member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for the Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunada-Welladay, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Great Slave, Range Lake, sorry, member for Great Slave, the member for Yellowknife South, and the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Massey. All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The result of the recorded vote, 15 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 15 has now had third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member of Inuvik-Boot Lake, that Bill 16, an act to amend the Social Assistance Act, be read for the third time, and Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member requested for a recorded vote. Motions in order. To the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave, the member for Yellowknife South, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Tabacha, the member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunada-Welladay, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik-Boot Lake.
All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 15 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 16 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Inuvik-Boot Lake, that Bill 17, an act to amend the Student Financial Assistance Act, be read for the third time, and Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member requested for a recorded vote. Motions in order to the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave, the member for Yellowknife South, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Tabacha, the member for Hay River North, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Tunada-Welladay, the member for Frame Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik-Boot Lake.
All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 15 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. The motion is carried. Bill 17 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Wednesday, October 17th, 2018, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgments, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's opening address, petitions, reports of standing and special committees, reports of committees on the review of bills, tabling of documents, notices of motion for first reading of bills, motions, first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration and committee of the whole of bills and other matters. Bill 7, Minister Statement 19-18.3, tabled document 215-18.3, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills. Orders of the day.
Mr. Clerk, this House stands adjourned until Wednesday, October 17, 2018, 1:30 p.m.
Order.